everybody. Welcome back to Women Seeking Wholeness. This is Cherie Burton, and this is a podcast for women and men who long to feel, express, and be who they truly are. This week is episode 141, Sacred Storytelling, kind of a follow-up episode from the last one, wherein I talked to Donna Mazzatelli about, whether or not it's time for you to start your story, write your story. And today we're talking with Adriana Alvarez. She's the CEO and founder of AMA Publishing. She's an international best-selling author. Her work has been seen in Forbes, Huffington Post, Fox, ABC, NBC, and many other outlets. The woman is so wise. I've gotten to know her personally, and we've had some beautiful conversations around the divine feminine. And so you're going to love this episode. It's timely now, for women to be sharing their stories, right? We established that in the last episode. But I think for you personally, it's kind of feeling into what's the next step for me? How do I know if I have a book in me? Not just writing my story, but is there a book that I need to be putting out there? And when you get your story out, it helps people go deeper with theirs. And that's kind of the divine permission slip for you to know if it's time for you to really dive into that. So I hope you enjoy this. We're going to talk not just about this art of sacred storytelling, but also tips for finding your zone of creativity, how to magnify your self-expression. She's got a couple of tips around that I found really fascinating. And then for those of you who are more like female soul-based entrepreneurs, know that this is your day and time to be a modern day leader and pioneer. So we're going to weave all of that into the discussion, and I think you will absolutely love this episode. Adriana, thank you so much for joining me today. I have loved, we've been talking for almost a half hour, and I'm at some point, I need to press record. I love it when that happens.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Oh, well, I can feel the depth of your offer. I can feel the depth of what you're creating for women. And I know that you probably have a journey that brought you to this place that's maybe fraught with some peril, perhaps, as well as some victories. So just in a brief, maybe minute or so, just kind of share with our listeners what brought you into the space of empowering women to tell their stories.
I went from being a volunteer in my 20s overseas in orphanages to starting a business with my husband to being this business consultant that heard these stories, heard the desire to be published, and yet witnessed all of the roadblocks, all of the fear, and I couldn't look away. And about the time I was going to provide an offer for my clients to write their book, I had a full-term stillbirth. And so for a couple of years, I just tied a knot and hung on. And it was when I came through the darkest points of that I realized I still couldn't let that aspect go. I still felt compelled and called to help people bring their story, to birth their story into the world. And that's how I ended up here.
I'm so sorry that you had to pass through that loss, but also so interesting to me that it was a birth, right, that preceded you birthing people through and midwifing them really through their own journeys. Wow.
That's it.
Wow. Well, yeah, unequivocally, you're interview 140 and unequivocally, there has been something that has happened along the journey that involves some kind of a loss. Whether it was for women who are now making a difference as leaders, whether it was the loss of a child, a loss of their faith as they knew it, a loss of their career that they thought they were on this trajectory. And then all of a sudden their door closes and they don't have that career anymore because it wasn't their soul path. But anyway, what we're really talking about is this preparatory work for your real soul path, your real work in the world. And I want to start there with our discussion. You and I talked off air about how kind of this emerging earth that's happening, is that we're moving more into these female-led companies, female-led fields. And you work in publishing. So what are you seeing there? What's the trend?
The trend has been from the beginning, really such a male dominated energy. And that is shifting. And this is what I want to be a part of, what I love being a part of is, number one, women not being intimidated by the industry, but feeling their capacity and their absolute readiness to be part of bringing stories out. Because here's the thing I learned is that when women are taking this on, when there are female-owned publishing houses, women are less likely to say no to other women. And in traditional publishing, men are 8 times more likely to be picked up by a publisher.
Wow.
Women also are stepping forward and saying, we'll produce and publish your book uncensored. We will not change your voice. We will not water it down. We will not tell you these aspects are unsuitable or
this won't sell or whatever.
This won't sell. That's it. And what we have to look at is, why have women been pushed out of places of leadership and publishing? And why are their stories continuously being censored? And what would happen if we moved out of that? What does that look like? And that's what I'm here for.
That's so powerful. And as I'm listening to you, it's like, that's been happening in literally every field. Mm-hmm. Women have been pushed to the sidelines in favor of just this grip on the old way. Mm-hmm. And it is male dominated, right? But there's something special about women coming forward with their stories, and that we're all kind of craving that, even men, yes. Because it validates something in them. Like, oh, if I hear this woman's story, how was his feminine shut down? How was he suppressed in his knowing, in his voice, in his intuition? So I see it as not just like a woman thing. I think that women sharing their stories will actually wake up these old systems, these old publishing houses, quote unquote, right, that have been so male dominated for so long. Okay, so you went into publishing, and so now you're seeing these stories come out, but you just published recently Younger Self Letters. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit about what you saw emerge from that and what the project was.
Well, I wanted to create a project that wasn't just entrepreneurs telling what they know. That is what we've done. We can probably all do it in our sleep. But I wanted entrepreneurs to go into a deeper place of their heart and decide on an age or a season of their life and go back to that place and speak to their younger self, mm-hmm. and offer compassion, love, insights to that person. And what I noticed is it was probably more challenging for most of the contributors, because they're so used to operating in this, get things done. This is who I am. This is what I know. This is my education, my background. But it was incredibly healing. And it brought them to a place, I saw this theme. It brought them to a deeper, more compassionate place toward themselves. And we all know that when we're there, mm-hmm. we can extend that out to others.
Yes. It's like necessary. Like you can't do it authentically if you're not connecting inside with that for yourself. So, and we talked about this, but my friend Melissa is also part of your project, and she's been on this podcast before talking about intimacy. Yes. And so it's powerful, because as I'm writing my book, I'm thinking about I'm going through my whole life, and just I feel this compassion coming up when I visit all these places in my past, like when I was 8, when I was 12, and some of those markers into, growing up, and how I felt, it's almost like I want my older self, who I am now, to go back and mother those pieces of me. And that's a whole other podcast episode, but I just think it's so powerful therapeutically to write a letter to your younger self, whether it gets published or not. Just that compassion that can come in for those pieces that we've judged or been ashamed about or confused or have had trauma. So what were the commonalities? Like, what did you see weaving through all the stories of these women who were part of your project, being yourself?
I think that many of them, they just hadn't taken the time to pause and reflect. And this is sometimes the theme with life. It's almost like we convince ourselves if we just get up, dust ourselves off, and keep moving as quickly as possible, that it didn't really happen. And I think going back and having that pause and having that reflection and honoring whatever it was, for better or for worse, no matter how it felt in the moment, it reminded them and it reminded me that the purpose of life is not to miss out on the golden nuggets and the gifts that those darker seasons, those long hallways have for us. It's so easy to think, well, it's just really about the high moments and the accomplishments and the mountaintop and the gold stars. But there's so much to be gained from pausing and reflecting on those more challenging aspects and seasons of our life. And what I noticed as well is many of them were able to give themselves more credit than they had in the past.
I can see that happening. I mean, I once heard a spiritual teacher say, you can't judge yourself in the past with the light level you have now. You're at a certain light level. I mean, children have bright lights, right? But then it grows dimmer and dimmer and dimmer when they get programmed and told who they are and kind of killed their spirit a little bit. So at this certain age, and it's different for everyone, you sort of internalize who you're not. And so your light dims a little bit, and you can't take the light and awareness and wisdom you have now. And, you can't judge that person back then. So that's the fine art of coming back and revisiting those places and enveloping your current self with your old self and integrating that, which is a whole process of soul psychology. But I think writing is probably the most powerful way to do that. Would you agree?
I would. It is so healing, so therapeutic. And when you take the time to sit down and write it, it also becomes very real. It's different than when it's rolling around in your head. There's something about putting it on a piece of paper or putting it, in a document, and it marks a moment in time. It makes it real. Yes, beautiful. I agree. It takes it from the spiritual, ethereal, esoteric into the now, into the physical. Yes. It captures it. You talk about sacred storytelling. Do you want to talk about your process for that, or what you mean by that? I love it. I love the alliteration. I love everything about that phrase. Thank you. So the difference between sacred storytelling and relaying information is that we have a connection to ourself, our soul's purpose, and to all that is. So we're connected to where we came from and where we're going. And oftentimes when we're just relaying information or teaching knowledge, it's really head-based, it's intellectual, and it doesn't include the heart. It doesn't include the soul. It doesn't bring all of us on the journey. And so what I teach my clients is, if you can access your inner storyteller and you can drop into these deeper places, then you are in the mode and in the art of sacred storytelling. And what that allows us to do is, I believe that before we got here, before this moment, we already contracted to support people in this lifetime, to work together, to co-create. Absolutely. Like we're on this together. Let's meet up. Yes. Let's move this forward. And so when I'm in that sacred storyteller and I am speaking from the depths of who I am, it makes it easier for those people who I've contracted with to find me, to know that's her. We came here to do something together. To be honest, that's how I felt when I got on this call with you. Yes, that's what just happened. There she is.
Hi, how you doing? It's been a while.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, and I think it's so multifaceted that we have these contracts and these, I believe, and I know you do too, because we were talking about it earlier, that this is the time for women to find each other.
Yes.
That we are on the earth right now because we have a collective purpose. And that is to awaken the sleeping feminine in men and women and to heal the earth with that. So that doesn't look like, when you talk about like creating these alliances with people in the old ways of just like one-upmanship or recognition or title or something. This is very organic and very soul-based, as you said. And so it's like, hey, if you take one for the team, if you get your story out there, I'll support you because it's helping me too. And it's helping all of us, as opposed to the hierarchical way of, well, I'm going to get this done and it's going to glorify me. And some people do that in the name of glorifying God, which is to me very blasphemous. Because
so true.
It's not God's way. To me is everybody goes together. And that's very ancient mother. That's very divine mother. Anyway, sorry, I got off on a little tangent there, but so sacred storytelling is kind of going into the depths of who you are, accessing your heart, accessing those places and recesses in your soul that have things to say. What would you say is the best way to facilitate that coming through? Like, let's just say someone's like, okay, I want to start capturing my stories. What's the best place or way or, mode for them to start doing that?
There's a couple of ways you can start to experiment because everyone's going to find their own way. And it's not really a cookie cutter, but here's a couple of places to get started. I find that I'm able to access it more easily in the quiet, in the stillness. We have to have these gaps and spaces in our life. It's almost like if we're just book solid and we're busy and we always have the next thing to run to, and I've got to get things done every minute of every day, and I've got to be so productive. There's not enough space and stillness for us to feel into that, to drop into that. And especially if it's a new practice, it's not going to rise up in the midst of the busyness.
Sure. It can't.
It can't. Yeah. There's not a gap. There's not an opening. So I have found in the early morning is when I have a lot of the stillness in the space. And I started by just asking, what is mine to share? What does my soul have to say? What does God, source, spirit want me to be the channel for? And then when we receive an idea, when we receive a word, a story, a thought, of whatever it is, if we trust it and we do something with it, I find that it comes more easily the next time. But if I go, oh, was that me? Or did I make that up? Or I don't really feel comfortable sharing that. Or what if somebody doesn't agree? Or they're going to think I'm crazy? Then it tends to shut that down. The other way that I found works really well is also nature, being out in nature, having our feet on the earth, being with the trees, the plants, the flowers. I also love walking by the river in the morning. I like to say when we connect with our mother and we connect truly to what makes sense and what is still real and attune to that, then it begins to flow.
That's beautiful. It's so interesting because I ask different thought leaders that kind of, it's all themed around the same question. Like, how do you access your power? How do you access your insight or your revelation? Or how do you get that? And everyone says nature. Well, I'd say like 90% of the time, there's something about nature that comes through. Like, it's almost like we've had this divine shutdown with COVID, and there's still a lot of stuff circulating around that. And it's kind of heavy. And but it's been a beautiful invitation to, like you said, get still, because that's another marker. Everyone always says, go within, get still, find your way to do that. Find it, how to quiet your mind or your busyness. And with nature, it's so sacred. This place that sounds like you live by a river, And you're in Colorado, you're by the Rocky Mountains. So am I. I'm not in Colorado, but I am by the Rocky Mountains. And so, yeah, literally like I can walk out my doorstep and within a 30-second walk, I'm in nature. Mm-hmm. And it's such a blessing. And I find some resistance even from getting out and going. Isn't that weird? Like I know intuitively that being in nature is going to facilitate writer's flow. It's going to facilitate, me being quiet inside. It's going to do all these things, but it's like, why do I resist that?
Yes.
How do you get past that resistance for yourself? Like maybe you don't have it, but any kind of resistance. Yes. And especially when somebody is like, okay, it's time to write. It's time to write in my journal, or it's time to start these younger self letters, or whatever it is. It's time to tell my stories. How do you get past that resistance that inevitably comes, that inner critic that you were just talking about? We have to be able to silence that. So how do you go about doing that?
The first thing is acknowledging that this is what's happening, because it's easy to tell ourselves, oh, it's just I'm busy, or I've got another thing to do. But when we can recognize I'm actually resistant to doing this, I'm throwing on the brakes. So then once I recognize what's happening, I just say, I see it. I see this for what it is.
Yeah.
I am aware of what's going on here, what's really happening here, not the story I make up about it. And one of the things that I've noticed, and this is really an observation of my boys are very wild. This is probably the best word to describe them, right?
I can relate. I've got a wild child. Two of them.
There you go. So when I think about everything in my life that has tamed me, then I go, that's why you're resistant to the wild. Because at some point, someone told you it was not the preferred way of being. There was someone who wanted to domesticate you and wanted you to be whatever the word is, right? Better mannered,
proper,
nicer,
ladylike. Yeah.
Right. And really what it was is they were afraid of the wild in me because it was calling to the wild that they had suppressed in them. And so I really think it comes down to our truest wild nature getting buried. And so that's why I'm resisting whatever it is, whether it's that full self-expression, being out in nature. And so when I just go back and go, that's who I really am. And more than anything, I want to return to her.
Yeah.
And so I am going to be dedicated to these practices that connect me to, that unearth that being.
Yes. That's so perfect. That just really resonates when you were saying like, why do I get so triggered by my wild children? Because my situation is I have 3 college kids and then a 12-year gap. And then we have a 7 and an 8-year-old, and same marriage, not a second marriage or anything. It's just the way the universe worked it out. So here I'm 52 and I have a 7 and an 8-year-old, and I'm going, why do well, it's obvious why I would get triggered. I mean, most women at my age are like, and I'm trying to write, and most women at my season are like sending their kids off and whatever, but I'm like starting over. So it's this invitation, and thank you for saying that, because it was like, I was getting chills. It's true. Why am I getting so triggered by their, chasing the dog around the house and yelling and all these things? And it's like, that's wild. That's free. That's who I am. And somebody told me to not do that. And I want to do that. In fact, I want to write that way, right?
Yes.
I want to write with that style. Okay. So I guess my last question to you is, it Adriana or Adriana?
I answer to a lot of things.
Everyone butchers my name, so that's why I'm sensitive to other people's names pronunciation.
Well, I say that half the world says it, with an accent. So, I say Adriana.
Okay, then I'll say Adriana. That's what I wanted to intuitively say. So Adriana sounds beautiful. how does somebody know sacred storytelling, all of this? How does someone know that like their sacred stories might want to go into a book? How do they know that if they have a book in them, really?
Good question. So what I tell people is this: if you have remembered who you really are, and you know the gift that you are here to bring to the world, then you're ready to bring a book forward.
Say that again. So if you know,
you've remembered who you really are.
Okay. So you reclaimed your true, authentic self. Okay, great. And the second was?
And if you know the gift that you are here to give the world.
Okay. Because
most people, they get caught up in paying bills and taking the trash out on Tuesday, and they forgot they actually came here to contribute something.
I think the resistance to that for a lot of women who are mothers are that, because I went through this ebb and flow, starting a business and stuff when my kids that are in college now were younger, and traveling and leaving and doing these projects and things I wanted to do. I could feel the tension, and I still experience it with, well, yes, I want to contribute to the world, but my programming was the highest way you contribute to the world is through being a mom, which is like this really fine two-edged sword.
Oh, isn't it?
And I think it goes back to the women, what we were saying about like the women of today. Yes, we're saying yes to motherhood wholeheartedly, full-heartedly, whole-souled. And there's an and there. We get to contribute more. This is the information age. Technology has allowed us to have more and still mother at the level we want to mother.
And that's just it. Every generation is unique. Our generation is unique in that, like you said, we can be amazing mothers and give our children what they need to become fully how to fully be themselves and to do what they came here to do. And I can run a business and contribute to the world. My grandmothers, my mom, they didn't have the same tools.
Yeah.
A career looked a certain way, and it did not always make space for home and family.
Right.
I work around my children. Everything is around them in my family. So it's a different world. We live in a different world, and we have different opportunities available to us. So we can embrace both.
Yes. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm on the planet, is to give women, mothers, the divine go ahead on that, the permission. Hey, I had to, starting in 2009 or 10, I was like piecing that out for myself and forging my own path and like clawing my way to that permission, because there weren't a lot. I mean, the soulpreneur path now is it, right? But back then I was just like, is this okay? Is this spiritual?
Yes.
Other women were trying to pull me back more than men, I would say.
I had that same experience. I had been in business. I had 2 babies in 12 months. And the most criticism I received was from mothers who were saying to me, you're failing your children and your first responsibility is to them.
And that's like a knife to the heart. There's no worse criticism than that if you're a mom.
It's the truth. That hurts in a way that nothing else can. And I had to do the same thing. I had to look in the mirror and ask myself, am I okay with this? Because at the end of the day, we have to honor the soul's work that we came here for. Our soul chose this path and this way of being. Yeah. And I could not deny that I had the desire for both. I was not going to pretend that, well, now that I have children, this doesn't matter to me. It still mattered to me. In fact, it mattered to me more because I knew who I was doing it for.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So it ignited me in a whole new way.
Yeah. I love what you're saying is that, you can play with that tension, and it can galvanize you even more on your soul path. Mm-hmm. What's so sad that I see, and I'm sure you've seen this too, is that women will start to go there. Mothers will say, they'll start to go there. They'll start to feel that soul fire and that passion. And they love their kids so much. And there's all that passion for their kids and home and everything. And then they get ignited with their message or their path or whatever. And then they'll start to move. And then the resistance will come from the outside. So they're like pandering to the voices of people. And then they'll internalize that and go, well, maybe God doesn't want me to do that. And then 10 years later, they're depressed. They're soul sick. They have health issues. And I'm not saying that that's the only contributor to that, but it's if you don't have a creative outlet, if you don't have a mode of expression, I always say, like suppression, expression, and depression are on the same spectrum. And so they're very much, it's like this triage of like, hey, I'm not saying you'll have clinical depression, but a part of your soul will experience a depression, pressing down, deep pressed. And when you and I started this conversation, because that's my whole career, was teaching about depression, and that's my background in psychology. And I lost a sister to suicide. And I started to see these, a mother of 5, really 14 years ago, my sister. And, I've started to see these threads of like women who like stuffed their voice, stuffed their gifts in favor of, this is the highest path, mothering. And when my kids are out of the house, then it will be okay. And I've just seen the collateral damage with that collectively, especially in my culture here.
I agree. This is why we see women who they don't have that sparkle in their eye and they don't have the pep in their step, because at some point someone convinced them that their own desires, their own passions, and their gifts didn't deserve to come forward. And that will kill us. That's a slow death.
That actually makes me tear up. That is honestly so sad. And I count myself blessed that I did not do that when I felt the call. I started to for a few years. And then I was like, you know what? I know this is from God. I know this is coming from a divine source. This is not Cherie being selfish. And even when we're talking about memoir, which I'm in the middle of, I've had some people say, like, that's so self-absorbed, or you hear all these voices of people like, that's borderline narcissist. Who cares about your story? Like, those are the old voices in my head. And I'm like, no, the reason like the divine gave me these experiences is so I can share them. They're not just for me. They're not just mine. They're for the collective. Okay, Adriana, first of all, any parting thoughts? And then where can people find you online, and what are your offerings? And I know they're beautiful offerings because I've checked it out. That's why you're on my podcast.
Well, thank you. What I want to say is that your story matters. And one of the most beautiful gifts we receive as human beings is when we hear our story coming out of someone else's mouth. And so when we allow ourselves to give that gift to others, it's incredibly expansive, and it does so much for the planet. So the best place for people to connect with me is at almaspeaks.com. That's AMASPEAKS.com. You can let me know what podcast you heard on, so be sure to mention
Women Seeking Wholeness. Woohoo. Yeah, because we have a special offer, right?
That's right. So you can click on there if you want to set up a chance to chat, or if you're interested in starting your own publishing house. I help women start their own 6-figure publishing company. So if it feels like that's part of what your soul's work is, or we can talk about the book that's inside of you ready to come out. And be a blessing.
And so I'll have links to that in our show notes, listeners. And I'll also include it in some of our posts on social media this week. I've really enjoyed where we've gone with this discussion. It was kind of one of those things that you and I were talking about. It was like, what direction are we going? I don't know where we're going with this, but what if I could put a synopsis to what we're saying is like, be your own kind of pioneer. This is the new frontier for women. So own where you've been, own your stories, love those parts of your past that you didn't have the same awareness you do now, and then gift it to the world, gift that wisdom to the world. And if you do want to write a book, I know this, that having someone hold space for you, and not just in an accountability kind of way, but energetically holding space for your story. You guys listening can't see, but I have like my hands up, like with like the world, just in a ball of like, here's this entity and this energy of my story. And if you wanted to put that into a book form so that more people can have their eyes on it and feel into like your life experiences, like you said, your story coming out, so you see yourself and the story coming out of someone else's mouth. That's really powerful. My favorite books to read are memoirs. I love them. I eat them up. Okay. So anyway, yes, we will find you online. Thank you so much for your time. This was wonderful.
Absolutely. Thank you for the work that you do in the world and the awareness that you're bringing. I appreciate it.
Basically, to me, this episode was all about connecting to where you are right now, being present and soul-based. And that will in turn connect you to where you need to be going, to your next right step. So if there is a story in you, there's a book in you, that's sort of secondary to like you being in your body, right? You could produce a very amazing story and book and get it all out there and still feel empty. So to me, that true success is coming back into that beautiful space of going into your depths of who you are, which is what storytelling is about, but it's being okay with that. Finding your own way to do that, to go into your own depths and fully self-express. So I hope that you have an absolutely beautiful week. You can find Adriana again on amaspeaks.com. This whole future of publishing around female-led pioneers. Love it. Love, 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 love it. So have a glorious week, and we will talk to you next time on Women Seeking Wholeness.